Yo, 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 what's up, everybody? Thank you for tuning into yet again another fantastic indie creator interview. It is your Capes Crusader, Cody, and we are keeping it geekly with our brand new friend, Chris of Behemoth Comics. How are you doing? Welcome to the stream tonight, man.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah. I had a chance to read the first issue of this. Thank you so much for sending me the PDF. I really appreciate it. And this was just so good. I loved just how you were able to craft the characters in it, the exposition, and just like the world building. I'm so excited to dive into that. But first and foremost, let's break down who you are.
My name is Chris Kipiniak. I'm a comic book writer. I've been at it for quite a while. I did my first Marvel book a while ago, actually at the turn of the century. I did a Nightcrawler limited series in 2001, which I'm still very proud of. Then I did a few issues of Marvel Adventures Spider-Man, which was an all-ages book that they did, as well as a short story that was in Amazing Fantasy, back when that was an anthology, again, in the mid-2000s. I've also written, independent stuff, but besides Behemoth, I've had a few short things that I've done on my own. And I've also written for other media. I write for a fiction podcast called The Truth. I've done a few episodes of that. And I'm actually currently a law student as well.
Wow, you have such an interesting backstory. How did you end up writing for Marvel? Was that something you did right off the rip, or did you have prior comic experience?
I had a little bit of experience, only in as much as when I was in college, I applied for an internship, and I ended up going out to Malibu Comics, which back then, again, I don't know how many of the listeners remember, but it ended
Dark Horse, right?
Well, not so much that, but they got bought up by Marvel.
Okay.
And became Marvel West for a while. And all of those characters end up getting subsumed. And I think they did try to do some crossovers and stuff, but for the most part, those characters are now gone. But the Malibu universe, I think the most famous one was something called Prime, which was sort of like a darker version of Shazam in the sense that it was a little kid. Yeah.
Did you work with, was it Ron Randall?
No.
I could have sworn he said something about working with them too in their earlier stages, and then going to Dark Horse. I think that's where I got the mix up with it. I remember the Malibu comics from our interview, so I was curious about that.
Well, it was, when I was in college, it was, I applied to a bunch of places, but this was the only one that sort of was interested in having me. I ended up working out there for a summer, and it was best summer of my life. I was surrounded by comics all the time.
That is so cool.
Yeah, and then after that, I'm an actor as well. I think I left that out of the of my little bio.
Like no big deal,
Just Broadway actor. It's not a big deal. But I'm an actor, and when I moved to New York, I had been living in Chicago doing shows, and then did a show that actually had some success and was on tour, and then decided to move to New York. I'm from this area, my family's in the area, and also it's New York, so I figured I'd move. And when I got here, I had a play that I had written, and so I decided to put it up myself in the same way that you do like an indie comic. I decided to do an independent play, and at that time there was not a lot of overlap between theater and comics, so I kind of figured like this would be kind of my niche. So I sent a lot of invitations to the show to every editor at Marvel in DC, because at the time both of them were in New York, and did end up getting a bite. And editor from Marvel came, saw the play, and introduced himself afterwards. And I remember saying, jokingly, but he was like, "Well, you seem like a very talented guy. I don't know why you want to waste your time in a third-rate medium, but why don't you come?" Again, he was kidding about it, but it was he was like, "I have no idea why." Like, because for him, he was like, "This is theater. This is like classy and different." And I was like, "But I love comics, and I never looked down on it as a medium or anything like that." So he called me in. He was the editor for the X books at the time, and this was just after Joe Quesada became editor-in-chief. And I came and was given the Nightcrawler gig.
Holy crap, that is so awesome.
It's funny, like you don't realize just how wonderful or magical a time it was, or how kind of lucky you are. Or lucky
Until the moment's gone, I get it.
Until the moment's gone. I mean, again, I appreciated it, enjoyed it, but it's still like I didn't realize, like, wow, that was really kind of it was very lucky that they happened to be looking for new people at the time. That, like I said, that it was different enough, because nobody else was inviting people to come see plays. They might be sending scripts and pitches and stuff, but this was just different enough that it made an impression on this editor.
So what do you think? Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. But what do you think the biggest parts of the play was that like drew him, like his interest and everything? What do you think was the part that sold him over the most?
I think the biggest thing was, I think, expressing some interest in it, and expressing some interest in showing that I was not somebody who just read comics, that, again, I don't know what it's like to be a comic book editor, and I'm sure it's very different now than it was, that meant 20 plus years ago. But I think at the time, like I said, there really was comics that seemed to be sort of its own particular thing. And yet there was still this is after the 90s, and while Vertigo was still sort of at its height, in the sense that I think there was a desire for people with a different aesthetic and a different point of view than just people who had read and had interests other than comics. And so at this time, this is already a couple years after Grant Morrison's Justice League, for example. And I think that and the other things around that time, like The Authority and Planetary, kind of changed in some ways and gave it sort of gave comics a sort of movie blockbuster kind of feel. And I think perhaps they were just like, oh, this is, it was a theatrical feel in the sense that, I loved the play. I love everything I write, so I'm not going to slag it off. But, it was a young person thing with a lot of like deep emotions, you yelled and stuff like that. But I think that there was part of that was appealing because the emotion was sincere. There is something similar to comics and theater in the sense of, there's a theatricality to it. That comics, there's so much of it is about the look, about the costumes, about the drama that's created in the layouts and stuff. That actually, I think it's and I think since then, there have been a lot of people that have come from theater and worked in comics. But I think that might be what he was responding to, thinking that there was just, like I said, that interest, but a little bit different than most of the stuff he was seeing. And, they wanted to get some new voices in to change things up because this was just after a big change in editorial regime. And then lastly, and I think particularly why he thought Nightcrawler would be a good fit was because, like I said, this was, I think, theater, the kind of emotional things that the characters were going through, I think was the kind of thing that he thought would jive well with the character who's been, I think, arguably the spiritual center of the X-Men.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, what he was probably responding to.
That's so cool still.
I hope.
And then you worked on Spider-Man too?
And then I got to do, that was, an editor, when I had been at Malibu, an editor that I'd worked with, Mark Panicia, he ended up at Marvel. And I had gotten in touch with him around the time that he got to Marvel. And he first offered me an 8-page story in Amazing Fantasy, where I wrote a story that I'm very proud of about the character Paladin. I don't know if you know, it's sort of a mercenary character. Okay. I think started out as a Daredevil supporting character, but he's shown up in a lot of Spider-Man things. He was in Heroes for Hire, sort of a spy story. But And then, but then he was doing the all ages line and offered me a few issues of this Marvel Adventures Spider-Man.
That's so awesome.
Which was, again, it's one of those things that, it was freaking awesome. And I think at the time I loved it, and I think I did a good job. I'm very proud of those issues. They were very different than the Nightcrawler things, because with Nightcrawler, I was very conscious of wanting to, like I said, partially because of my theatrical background, be kind of deep and open-hearted and emotional in a way. But these Spider-Man books specifically, because they were all ages, one and dones, could be silly and fun.
It sounds like you could have a lot more fun with them.
Absolutely. And so it was nice to be able to do sort of both of those sides, because I think I'm hilarious. And so I think my Spider-Man issues were hilarious too. So I was very, very happy to get a chance to do it. And again, because I always like characters that are a little bit more off the beaten path. So in some ways, Spider-Man was just like, cool. But I kind of didn't realize like just how fun it would be to write somebody so recognizable, so not just recognizable, but like beloved and classical, and to be able to do it in an all ages fun way was really great.
That's so cool. We have Oblivia over on Twitch saying, oh, this cover looks cool. And that nerd saying, hey, yeah, welcome to the stream, guys. How are you doing tonight? So I got to ask, before we move on, I have to ask, which was harder for you, writing Nightcrawler or writing something that was all ages, kind of trying to be more, inclusive to kids as well? Was that a challenge for you?
No, I did not feel that it was a challenge. Like I have a potty mouth. Like that would be the hardest part. But no, I truly, this is one of those things, like I think I'd mentioned before, I've written for a lot of media. I've written for theater, film, television, podcasts, nonfiction. Right now my day job is sort of journalism, covering New York City land use stuff. And there's something, I mention all of that because there are certain things where a story is always a story, no matter the medium that you're telling it in. Certainly you take advantage of certain things. For example, a podcast is totally sound. So certain things will be told better. But you're always trying to create a situation that the audience will become interested in and stay with you and have something that draws them along. There has to be some, I know this is somewhat fallen out of favor recently, but there has to be some kind of conflict or some kind of resistance against that in order to create a certain amount of drama. And it sort of doesn't. Kids are smart. Kids are smarter than they're often given credit for. And so I specifically did not want to talk down to them. Yes, some of the jokes and stuff one might say are a little bit less, they're not, there might be a little bit less sophisticated in a certain sense, but they're also like, I don't know, like there's the expression of like, dad jokes. Like no matter how old you are, people do enjoy like puns and just being goofy in general. So for me, it didn't feel like writing down or talking down to kids. And I remember being a kid and I really didn't like, and I think this is part of why I liked comic books, because they didn't feel like they were patronizing in the same way that I found like books written for kids often were. And I thought they often were. And then I thought that they were a little bit preachy and patronizing. And I just made a point of not doing that. And I hope it turned out well. Again, somebody else might disagree, but I didn't find it difficult at all because I think the most important thing, whatever the medium you're writing in, is to respect your audience and to trust that they're as smart as you are, that they're going to be interested in, that they'll pick up what you put down. If you do a good job of it, they might not if it doesn't make sense, if it's unclear. But no, I didn't find that hard at all. Or at least not for that reason. It was hard in the sense of a one and done story can be all depending on the size of the story you do, the constraints can make it difficult. But no, it's a fun character. It's an established character that I know and love, and he's got such a great rogues gallery of so many different villains to choose from. All of that just made it easy to come up with story ideas. Just because.
So which was your favorite to write, villain wise?
Villain wise, I think Swarm. Okay. Just because I think he's such an out there concept, of a character. He's a corpse of a Nazi scientist, but I guess by now it's probably a little bit late for that. But a corpse of like a crazy madman who's animated by bugs. Like, I just think that's such a strange concept that I just loved it and loved playing around with that. I also loved my issue, with. I mean, I was about to say I loved all of them, but then getting to write the Green Goblin was also a lot of fun. Just because, again, that's a character that has so much history and is so inextricably linked with Spider-Man that it was great.
It's funny you mentioned. I read some study that says letting kids read comic books increases their vocabulary by so many words compared to reading regular books. I don't know what the number is, but it's out there. It's a scientific study. And another thing is my son's favorite character from the Amazing Spidey and Friends on Disney Plus is Green Goblin. Sure. I remember Disney. We went to Walmart to get the little toys, and he cried when he didn't get Green Goblin, so we had to go back and get another one. It was like a mystery open one. So I love it. But hey, we can save all that for a whole other podcast. I feel like I could just ask questions after questions. Let's transition to the real juice while we're here. And
Yes.
this one's a really interesting one because like you went from like an all ages story to like putting these kids in such horrible situations. How did that happen?
Yeah, I have to admit, like, I'm a 90s guy, so my aesthetic has always been like horrible things happen and everybody's sad and brooding and it's always raining. Like that's sort of always where I want to be. So the idea for Behemoth had come from, I had a chance once to talk with the Vertigo editor.
Mm-hmm.
This is towards the end of its cycle, but let me back up. There are a lot of Vertigo used to do in its earliest days a lot of like reimaginings of old concepts and sort of giving them a postmodern reimagining, and sort of updating them and giving it sort of an adult spin. And I loved those kinds of books. I think like Animal Man, Doom Patrol are, to me, there's still like the Shadow, I guess, was, but the Shadow to a certain extent, just sort of reimagining something from old and giving it another look. I love that. And so I, as a kid, had all the who's who's. And so I remember reading through them and I'd always be fascinated by characters that I'd never heard of.
Mm-hmm.
And there was one, which I thought was the strangest concept, which was the Creature Commandos, which is an old DC war property from the 70s it was a World War II book. And it was about these soldiers that got surgically changed to look like movie monsters, like a Frankenstein, a Dracula, and Wolfman, because they figured that would scare the Nazis and they would be so freaked out that the Creature Commandos would overrun them. And I just thought this was such like a weird concept and I loved it. But then when trying to, as a young writer and trying to get in with Vertigo, which was the place that I wanted to be, because that's really, like I said, where my aesthetic was, I was trying to think of like strange concepts that would, a modern reimagining would lead to something. And so the idea of the Creature Commandos stuck in my mind. And I thought, like, what if they were real creatures as opposed to people that had been changed? And what it would be like to be like a monster treated kind of like a human. And there's something in, I don't want to editorialize too much, but being a soldier, being in the armed forces, there's something that is potentially you're being asked to kill potentially. You're also being asked to put your life on the line. And so there's something about one's humanity that gets a little bit tested. And so I thought the idea of, again, somebody who's a monster, actual monsters being put in that position, I thought that there was something interesting there. This, I did get a chance to talk to the editor. He sort of was not as impressed with it as I thought. But then a couple of years later, I kept thinking about the concept, again, of these sort of monster soldiers that were treated like animals. And so I refined it, and that's what ended up becoming Behemoth. Was, again, starting out with this idea of monsters being used as disposable weapons, and the toll that would take on the sentient being who's the one who's kind of being dehumanized and put in those situations. And so again, the more I refined it, the more the idea of being a monster, being treated like a monster, where the line between those things are, like that became much more interesting to me as I thought and developed it. So that's where that came from. And so to this day, they ended up putting out a Creature Commandos like trade paperback of the original war things. I remember reading it, and again, I still love it. I think it's still so strange. It's got great art. It was written by J.M. DeMatteis, if you know that writer, who's one of my favorites. And they're just fantastic war books. But this is, again, just a very different thing, which I wanted to, again, and also take advantage of the medium. We talked a little bit about the medium before, but this is comics being both words and pictures. I think you can do something with the subjective experience. And here we have a person where we have her first person narrative as she is changing from a human and sort of losing her mind, becoming more bestial over time and turning into a monster. It's affecting her perceptions. So
Yeah, I really love the concept. The story was really like riveting, I would almost say, because you feel the emotions. I really liked how you did the lettering. Like, yeah, I don't want to spoil too much, but the way you were we were talking about it earlier. The way the exposition was done through letters.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I really like that. You know, I know you said that original story was your inspiration, but was there anything else? I kind of picked up District 9 vibes. I don't know if you've ever seen District 9.
I have, and I love that movie.
Yeah.
But were you? Yeah, I mean, I love that movie, and actually, I was thinking just a couple days ago. I think probably in relation to the comic, just thinking of that ending. You know, for the people watching who haven't seen District 9, I don't want to spoil too much, but there's like a very sad ending image to it that I found really really touching. And the whole movie, like, it doesn't seem like it's going to be a touching movie. It's like it's a really exciting sort of cynical sci-fi thing, but there does end up being this sort of like kernel of humanity to it and this heart to it that is very moving. I hadn't thought of that, but yeah, that's a great comparison. So I often think about The Fly and the Dirty
Fly,
Dozen.
Yeah, The Fly was okay.
Those are sort of the comps when I'm sort of describing to people. I'll often say like it's The Fly meets the Dirty Dozen.
No, I can definitely see that. So you ended getting up on Scout, right? Their horror label, Black Caravan. How did that actually end up happening for you?
You know, my co-creator is J.K. Woodward, who's an artist that people might know, particularly from his IDW Star Trek work. He's really well known for doing like photorealistic stuff, and so he's done a bunch of different Star Trek books and some gorgeous stuff. Like particularly if people are seeking out his adaptation of Harlan Ellison's City on the Edge of Forever script is just amazing. Like the photorealistic stuff. So that's the artist that I'm working with. We met through a mutual friend, and we're sort of trying to get each other interested in potential ideas of things to work on, and this was one that we glommed onto. And I mention all of that because we did the book a few years ago, and since then he's a working artist and does the con circuit and stuff. And at one of the cons, he was tabling next to Joe Schmalke, who had recently started Black Caravan as a label within Scout Comics.
What are the odds?
Yeah. And Joe, I think Joe and JK really hit it off. And so he was like, if you've got something that you're interested in, this sort of horror and sci-fi realm, bring it to us and we'd love to publish it. And luckily we had this book already finished. And, for me, I could just sit and be doing my homework and JK got it all taken care of. But that's how we got hooked
so
up.
Awesome. You're probably like, man, this artist paid off in like more ways than one. Let's go.
Absolutely. Besides the fact that his work is beautiful, the very fact that he, without my having to lift a finger, got us the publishing deal. Yeah.
So you that was right when they first started. Were you one of the first issues on that label?
There have been a few, but I think it is still relatively new. I think they started, don't quote me on this, but certainly I think within the past year, I think, Scout Comics has been around, I think, since 2015, 16 or so. But I think Black Caravan is a year or so old. I don't think we were one of the first. They have, I've been looking at the catalog and seen a few other great comics, but yeah, so I wouldn't want to say they were one of the first. I'd love to.
Behemoth though, right?
They know yes, that's right. They're all good, but they're second best.
Let's kind of break things down a little bit of the protagonist, if you can, without spoiling too much. What was your choice for going with the design? This type of infliction that she has. If you can tell us maybe a little bit of what it is without spoiling a whole lot.
Yeah. So this is a world where, for some reason, and children are starting to turn into monsters. And so our main character wakes up one morning with claws, with these sort of big sharp claws that with this sort of plate-like, sort of rhinoceros-like
Mm-hmm.
flat plates growing on her skin, mostly around her arms and torso. And so that's how it begins for her. And what she is a very nice young, 15-year-old kid
Mm-hmm.
in the suburbs who goes to sleep with one set of problems and wakes up with a different one. So the part of it for her is this fear of what am I becoming, and not knowing what the end game will, excuse me, not the end game so much as not knowing what the end will be.
Yeah.
Is it just like, oh, these are my hands for the rest of my life? But as we find out, and it's not too much of a spoil, over the course of the first issue, then the second, third, and fourth issues, it's an ongoing transformation. And I'm not the first to the sort of puberty metaphor, but all life really, all throughout all our lives. I mean, we're both adults, but you keep changing.
Yeah.
It always happens. And sometimes that change is great. Sometimes you change because you want to, but sometimes it's not something you want. It's just something that happens to you. And then it becomes how you allow that to define you, how you define that change, and
Mm-hmm.
how much of your identity can stay becomes, sorry, that's getting a little bit thematic, but you'd asked sort of about the design. Like I said, I wanted to start with this contrast of somebody who's small, a kid, not particularly, but a child who then is getting big, and like that mismatch to me, I think was, and there's something about the mismatch of the size between the size of her claws and how rough they are with the rest of her,
Mm-hmm.
that I thought was, again, I wanted to make it as uncomfortable as possible.
Yeah.
Not that, again, not as uncomfortable as possible, to put that position to sort of exaggerate those things and make everything sort of suck for her.
Yeah. And it does. I think you really did a good job of that. Is she based off of any animal or insect in particular?
No. I had a few ideas of things and design comps that I thought were interesting, from both the natural world and also from comics. Like the design of a character that I've always just found really interesting. It's pretty obscure, but I think it's just a cool, weird thing, is there's a character in DC, there's a group called the Great 10, which is this superhero group from China that I think were introduced in 52, when that series was. And it's a cool concept, but their leader is this guy whose name is August General in Iron. And it's this man who's grown this sort of exoskeleton that he's like trapped in. And it looks kind of like stone, kind of like steel, kind of like a shell. I don't know quite what it is, and I don't know the character well enough, but I thought there was just something very cool about that was something that I thought was an interesting thing to start with, as well as in Kingdom Come, if you know that series from the night, again, we're going way back, but the Blue Beetle design in that. So yeah, there were certainly a lot of bug things, because I did want part of it to be that insensitive, sort of somewhere between hide and shell, growing up and around her. And then I tried to think of like things that I found kind of gross, like having, again, spoiler for as it goes on, she develops mandibles.
You're like, let's ruin her life.
Yeah. I mean, it sucks. But then, we have a whole bunch of other monsters, and in the background, particularly that JK, like, he just designed all of them, all sorts of weird stuff. But yeah, so with our main character, Teresa, like I said, I wanted it to be that contrast between little girl, then becomes big, insensitive thing, Behemoth. So those were the concepts there.
So what would you like when a reader reads this for the first time for them to kind of feel after reading issue number 1? Like, what are you hoping readers walk away feeling?
I think intrigued, and entertained, obviously one, but as far as like more specifically what intrigues and entertains them is I think a little bit of pathos. I think, I hope that there is, even though, it's a 4-issue story and each chapter is its own, each chapter I hope has its own kind of arc within there.
Mm-hmm.
And what we see in the first issue, I hope, and again, please, listeners or viewers, let me know if I did it right once you've read it. Here we have this person who wakes up with this problem, and then her reaction is fear, and we also have outside forces that are sort of telling her what she is and sort of defining her, and putting her in a situation. She ends up being put into this sort of internment camp for other people who have this same issue, and then she has to figure out how to deal with it. And I think what I'm hoping that the reader will come away with is an understanding of being interested in, like, oh, I want to know how this character is going to be dealing with this in the future. Because hopefully they're interested in the way that she's overcome the obstacles that have been shown to her, rather that she's had to deal with up to that point. I'm hoping that that's fueled by a certain amount of pathos, because people can relate themselves to either a time that they were, I don't know, I moved, before 2nd grade, and I remember very much being in a new school.
Yep,
And again, it's not quite an internment camp for monsters, but on the other hand, it was still weird to then be slotted into a new community. Things like that I'm hoping that people can feel that and sort of understand her. And you'd mentioned a couple times that the whole story is done from the first person perspective. And I'm hoping that they feel experientially like what the character is going through. That's my hope.
No, I think that is so awesome. So before we dive into, we have a chance to look at the first couple of pages. But before we do that, what would you say, having wrote for Marvel, having done plays and stuff, what would you say the creative process from, experiences, working with that led into Behemoth? Like, what did your process look like? What influences did you take from working on that other stuff compared to this one?
I think the biggest thing is, as I'd said before, that a story is a story is a story, in the sense that, there's got to be certain things like drive and conflict and stuff like that. And because I'm also an actor, when, there's one thing, writing, you come at it from one direction, but from acting, you come at it in a different way. And ideally, the two sort of meet in the middle. Mm-hmm. As an actor, what you're looking for is what you're, it's almost like a joke and the kind of thing they make jokes about on TV and stuff like that. But like, when you ask, like, what's my motivation? Like, anytime you're in a scene, you're doing something, whatever you're doing it for a reason. Yeah. Even if you're delivering a pizza, if you're picking up a cup of coffee, if you're trying to blow up the world, the fact is you've got something that you want, and there's a reason why you're doing what you're doing. Even if it's just sitting and waiting, it's because you're waiting because you want something, So for me, the writing process for the comic was to really understand the character and understand what she wants, because it's a high concept book about this idea of kids turning into monsters being turned into disposable weapons. And a high concept is great, but in order to turn that into a story, you have to have characters who are have desires, have wants, and they have to fit within that high concept. So for me, for comics, it does work. It's still a character oriented medium with drama, with people who are doing things. They're doing bigger things, and they're drawn, but it's still got to be the same. So coming up with the story was very much about that, was following this idea of what does this character want, and then what either prevents that or enables that. How does that want change because of what happens? Character takes one action and it either goes the way they want or it doesn't. And depending on how that goes, it changes that character. And maybe it changes what they want, or maybe it changes the way that they get what they want. but the fact is there's some change, and that's how a sort of plot ends up getting made. And then on top of that, because, and again, I'm working with an artist, I'm collaborating with an artist, and I have a genius artist who's got a better visual sense than I do. But I know that this is a medium where certain things look, there's certain scenes that look dramatic, and and you want to build to that. And as a comic book reader, I love splash pages or a double page spread or something like that. The layout and the rhythm of a page to me is so exciting that also affects, like, when you come to a point you could choose one thing to happen or another, you choose the one that's going to look coolest on the page.
Absolutely. It sounds like you have this down to a science. I mean, you just, the different mediums you've been a part of, acting, writing comics, writing plays, like, it just seems like you have this down to like a dot. It is really impressive to listen to.
Well, thank you. It sounds impressive, but when it comes down to doing it, it can be a lot harder. Because I'll tell you, man, it's always like, I don't know how often, obviously you're in the business and you read comics and stuff. I don't know how often you've read somebody else's script, or if like a friend's like, hey, I'm working on this story. What do you think of this? Like, and I don't know how often you've done that. I always find I'm brilliant when talking about somebody else's script or story. I was like, this is what you should do, and this is why this works. Or whatever. But when it comes to my own, I can't see it necessarily. You know what I mean? Because it becomes harder because I think all the things that I've said are right to some greater or lesser extent. All those things are true. But when you're evaluating your story, sometimes you're so into it, and you have your own kind of biases or tastes, things that you like, and it's like, maybe this isn't really
start questioning yourself.
Kind of, yeah. So that's one of the reasons, and again, one of the reasons why both why comics and any collaborative medium is so exciting is because you got somebody else to bounce ideas off of and to get their point of view, and when the two come together and when you agree on something, it can be much better than just one person's point of view. So I mean, I appreciate you saying that, and there are a lot of people who think it's a science, and it is to a certain extent, but of course what makes a comic good, or any kind of story or any kind of writing good, is the quirk and idiosyncrasies of the particular creator. That's why I know AI is sort of a thing now, and I don't know if you see on Twitter, people have these AI producing art.
Oh yeah, the like the funky images and stuff.
Yeah. And like, it's all over all over the place, and it's weird, but it's not quite the same thing as if somebody tried to draw it or render it themselves, because there's something different about being human. Sorry, I'm just realizing how sweaty I'm getting in my fifth floor.
This interview is just getting too hot. I get it.
Yeah, that's right. The book is even hotter, folks.
Yeah, and speaking of that, let's fan the flames. Let's go ahead and check out the first couple of pages. So let's go ahead. What are we looking at with this cover? I mean, we're seeing a lot of things happening. Can you give us a little bit of a breakdown of what we're looking at?
This cover, I remember talking to James about the cover when we first started it, and there were definitely a few comps of things. Like there was a cover from Alex Ross did this book Justice, that there was something where the sort of backlighting of, I think, the Riddler or something like that, I just thought was kind of cool. And so that was something that I thought the idea of having our main character sort of in the center and things coming at her and engulfing her from the dark was kind of cool. I don't remember exactly how I described it to him, but just this idea of her being consumed, taken, that there's something that's going to draw her in. You see it's not just one particular kind of monster that's grabbing her. You have a claw, a talon, a tentacle, and I don't know what you'd call the sort of bug-like thing at the top right.
Right here.
No, the opposite. Like that. Yeah.
It looks like a reptile claw, almost like an
iguana. Like a claw. Maybe that's the best word for it. So that was the concept. That was the idea. Because again, like I said, this is about somebody who, I know I've said that the book is about a bunch of different things, and it is all of those. But like, to me, thematically, it's very much about identity. It's about a person who is trying to retain her humanity when the world is trying to thrust, or let's say outside circumstances are trying to put an identity on her, and she is trying to retain her own identity. And so this, I thought, was kind of, again, a dramatic way to show that, of here's this person in the middle, but there's these outside forces, and they're all different. It's not like, as I was saying before, not just one monster. There are a bunch of different kinds of monsters, that we're in a world where all of these things are around her, and she is in the midst of it and trying to hold on to herself, sort of retain some control.
Was there any emphasis on like her symbolism behind her standing like this, or was that just to kind of showcase her arms?
I didn't. That you'd have to ask James, but I think maybe he was responding to this idea of her sort of hugging herself, trying to again assert a certain kind of independence, retain control in the face of these things around her.
All right, so let's go ahead. We're going to look at page 1, and I thought this was a really interesting way to start off the book. Hold on one second. Sorry.
Sure.
My scrolling's getting a little too dangerous for me. So we start off with our protagonist's mom answering the door. And, you could tell she's kind of, something's going on. She's in some sort of turmoil. And it's not the police that are here, which I thought was a really interesting way to start it off. So what kind of inspired you to begin with this?
I think I liked the idea of knowing where it's going to go, and how it's going to, let's say, get violent, get dark, get all of those things, to start in the opposite of that, what seems like a conversation, somebody answering the door. I also liked the idea of having it be, 6, the same shot, same angle over 6 panels. And I thought that there was something about the formality of that and the sort of simplicity of the scene at first, which would create a sort of growing unease over the course of it, as she is trying to just be pleasant and just answer the door. But as you said, we realize that something is wrong. And finally, at the end of the first page, we see that there's blood.
Yeah.
And that there's something much worse. And we have this character, the sort of government, this sort of agent pushing his way in.
Yeah.
So I thought it was that growth.
She made a 911 call. At the time, we're kind of left wondering what's exactly going on. We get a glimpse of someone upstairs getting sick in the toilet as well. I thought this was really awesome, the way you built up this beginning scene and kind of leading up to essentially like the climax. We meet our protagonist. Do you want to go ahead and give us a little bit of a breakdown of her?
Sure. Like I said, Teresa is a young girl, probably about 15, 16, lives with her family, lives with her parents in a suburban area, somebody whose problems are, normal, like most of us, but like I said, wakes up one day and everything has changed. And like I said, at that age, I can, it's a little bit old. It's like on the older end of puberty, but but I think any sort of transformation, I think it always calls to mind puberty as a sort of metaphor for puberty, and I think that it certainly is part of it. But like I said, I really did try to write it a little bit more universally than that, to be just about change and about dealing with change and about being how to sort of assert your own ability to assert control over that change to an extent, like by the way you act, the way you react, even if there are circumstances that you can't control. So here we have her body is beginning to literally betray her as it has physically changed, and she's starting to feel sick.
And we'll zoom in on this a little bit too. Did you find any difficulty writing a female protagonist compared to the male counterparts that you did? I know you said you wrote Nightcrawler, you wrote a Spider-Man. I mean, was it hard transitioning to a younger female going through puberty?
I don't think so. Again, I'll let readers decide. But I don't think so. And I think in the same way that when talking about writing for children and stuff, I think in the end, people are people. People, like, there are things that we share. that people do share. And so I tried to emphasize those things. And I think, another thing that comes up in acting as well is this idea of never judge a character, even, in the script, never play like they're stupid, never, because it's not going to be interesting. Like, maybe in some sort of like comedy sketch or something like that. But for the most part, you want to think of any character as being as smart as they possibly can be, or as you could possibly make them and stuff like that. And I think that just applies to anything that whoever you're writing, whatever their situation is, whatever their demographic is, that you always want to assume that they're the smartest that you can possibly make them and give them as much integrity. So again, like I said, I'll let readers decide, but I really just wanted to write. I did not find it difficult.
So we transition to the next page. We see that she's stuck in the bathroom hiding. She's going through these changes, not knowing what's going on, and these government agencies are starting to surround the door. Up earlier, we also seen that her mom, saying she's still my daughter. She's kind of reluctant to like let them check her out, and things are not looking too good for Teresa. I mean, things are starting to get to more of a like climatic point for her in this story, and it was pretty early on. I mean, what was your reasoning for having like this, like, this happen like so early in the issue, like having her like start to transform and having these government agents show up as early as they did?
I think it's just one of those, you're always, I try to think of things that I've enjoyed and that I find interesting, and use that as sort of a model. And you learn. I always want to get into the interesting stuff as quickly as I can. Yeah. And like I said, there's a certain amount of. Yeah, exactly. You can create a certain amount of dread by having it be at home, but I wanted to get to the action quickly. And I think that like small details, you learn about the character through small details in the action that they need to be taking. So there's no need, to get to, if I'm misunderstanding your question, some people like a long build up before sort of the action starts, where you sort of like, let's say a scene where you're watching the person go about their day or something like that. And presumably, you're learning something about the character that's then going to change, right? Like presumably you're learning about, by the way the person goes about their day, you learn about who they are. And presumably that will then become part of the action later on. And, for a different kind of thing, perhaps for a movie, for a different kind of character study, that would be one thing. But I think for comics in particular, I love action, and I love the grotesque. Like I wanted to get to the monsters quick. You know what I mean? Like that to me was important. So yeah, so I wanted to have just enough of sort of home to show that there was something that she was losing, that this was a big change for her. But I also thought it was important to have it happen quickly, just because that's both entertaining for me and for the reader, but also I think jarring for her. And I think is, again, another part of the how difficult the transformation is, and how difficult it is, and again, that's something, again, I don't know about your own experiences, but I think of very much a lot about childhood, where things would happen very fast that you have no control over.
Oh yeah,
like you didn't realize,
go with the flow.
You have to go with wherever your parents send you, where you're gonna go, like, and so that to me, I think maybe subconsciously, and I'm only thinking of this now, that I think that might be part of it too. Is like jumping in quick, because every time you think you got a little routine going, something changes.
Life's like Hoda.
Yeah, exactly. So,
page 5, we see her jumping out of the window. That you have the government agency people going, zip lining down the roof, and she's just cannonballing out the window. Things are really hitting a climatic point right off the rip. She's making a break for it. They're yelling sedate her. Her mom's wondering what's going on, and then we see her start to kind of lose a little bit more control. I don't know if you want to look at page 6 or if you want to just leave it right here, though.
Oh, that is a tough call, because I love page 6. Let's go ahead. But I will say with this, to me, this is an initial scene that's almost like the problem in miniature, right? Like here we have, you see her at first, and she's like, oh, this pitiable person who's throwing up in the toilet. She's sad, she's crying, but very quickly flips and not out of nowhere, but because she is provoked somewhat, put into a corner. And again, I think that that's a very real, very human thing about when
Yeah.
you feel trapped and you feel threatened, and especially if you feel wounded. Like I said, so much of it is this new normal, waking up feeling like, oh my gosh, I'm gross. What the hell I don't even have hands anymore. She accidentally cuts herself in the mirror. Like all of these things, this adjustment. And if that were to happen to me, all I would want would be like a week, like of nobody talking to me, so I could like figure it out.
Yeah,
but then to have other people, but of course, like you said, life's like, hold up, and these people are on top of her from the get-go. So that to me was again very important to show, or not so much to show, like that's it. Like there are it becomes a provocation, and it becomes this desire to get away and to be left alone.
And then we'll finish it off with page 6. So right here, things are getting shocking for her. At first we find you can't go for the hide, so parts of her have hide already built in. You gotta go for the skin, and they efficiently do. They shock her, they go to get the collar, and she's netted like an animal.
Yeah.
And
that was I think I might have mentioned it, but one of the things that I just thought about with this a lot was how these children are treated like animals, like that there is something animal-like in the way that, like I said, they ultimately are trained to become these soldiers, and the training to me is meant to mimic the way people train pets. And I don't mean to create like a moral equivalency, but there is something about this dehumanization of thinking that you're no longer human. You can't think like a human. You can only think in these sort of small, repetitive ways. And again, without spoiling anything, like it's true to a certain extent. Like she is regressing and becoming more monstrous, and so is less. Her intellect is softening.
Yeah.
But that to me, and I'm so glad that you said it, because from the get-go, like I said, there's something about treating people like animals that I think is to me is scary, and I think is sad. And again, that's nothing against animals or pet owners or anything like that, but it's just that dehumanization and sort of thinking you're above.
We have Ichthus over on YouTube stopping in to say what is up, and that the art looks amazing. I love the art. Speaking of that, how much of influence did you have on this, or did you kind of let your artist take the wheel on a lot of the design? How did that look like?
It was a combination. I think certainly with the main characters, certainly with Teresa and some of the other members of her of Behemoth, that she ends up meeting with the few main characters. I had some definite ideas of what they should look like, something in the but JK did sort of had free reign for a lot of the others. I did write full script for a few reasons, and so therefore a lot of the design and layout and stuff I suggested. I think, as always, and I think any good writer, any good comic writer will tell you to listen to your artist.
Yeah.
And we would talk through the finished script, and he would suggest sometimes like, maybe if I do it from a different angle, or But part of the reason why I wanted to do full script was to make sure that all the details that I wanted to include could fit. You know what I mean? So in some ways, that was also meant to be like almost like a proof of concept. Like, I know here's a layout that could work, but if you could, of course, you as the artist, if you got something better to do something similar, then that would be great. I think if we, we're hoping, if we have some, if there's enough interest, that we would do a volume 2, in which case I probably would want to, work a little bit more collaboratively, even still, because again, he's a fantastic artist, and as much as I love the book, I think it only could have been improved by my being a little, again, this is our first collaboration and stuff like that. But to have more time to sort of integrate the scripting with his sort of weighing in with, oh, wouldn't it be cool if we did it this way?
Or go ahead.
Oh, I can't remember. I think I was just going to sing James' his praises more. because I just think he's a great artist. Like I mentioned, he mostly does photorealistic stuff, so it was exciting for him to do something a little bit less realistic, and because monsters aren't real, to be able to break out of that realism a little bit and to do this more line-oriented art, which I think is stunning.
No, absolutely. So we are only taking a look at the first 5 to 6 pages, guys. If you want to take a look, you're going to have to buy issue 1. Where can viewers and listeners find issue 1? Like, where is it available to purchase?
In a matter of hours, it will be at your local comic book shop. They're all over the country.
That is so
I think
awesome.
It's lcs.com or whatever. They have the comic book finder. But yeah, I think most stores should carry it. And I hope you enjoy it. I think Scout and Black Caravan have been fantastic to work with and have made this a really easy process, and have given us a lot of support to get the book out there. So I hope people will check it out and enjoy it.
And this is how exclusive of a look that is, not even out in stores yet. Let's go.
That's right.
Let's go. So let's go ahead. We're going to be transitioning to our main cameras again. Let me go ahead and switch it over right over here. We have Ichthys saying monsters aren't real. I have a blood-sucking unicorn tapping on my window as we speak. Like things are getting colorful for you, Ichthys.
Yeah, where do you live? Because I don't know, in
where do you
Brooklyn,
live?
we don't have a lot of those.
Yeah, Ohio, we just have a whole bunch of corn, so.
Yeah.
Ichthys saying the cover looks amazing as well, too.
Yeah. Yeah, we have also, there's a variant cover, which some stores will have, which is a very moody, broody piece. Yeah, it's exciting.
And so this brings us to our next topic. You are also going to be working on issue number 2, and you're taking pre-orders for that as well, right? This is the link. If anyone's interested, go ahead and check it out and get your pre-order in. So what's the pre-order looking like for you?
Pre-orders, it should, it's through your local comic book stop. Let me try that again. Through your local comic book shop. Maybe when you go in and get issue 1, you can pre-order issue 2, and just ask for it by name. There's a company, Behemoth Comics, which is a different publisher, but this is a comic called Behemoth from Scout and Black Caravan. But I don't remember off the top of my head what the preview codes are for issue 2. But issue 2 is should be in previews now. And if you ask for it at your shop, they should be able to pre-order it for you.
So just without spoiling too much, what can we expect from issue number 2? Just a little taste of it.
You can expect an amazing cover. I think it is a very chilling kind of cover that is kind of gross, but I like. So I don't think I'm spoiling too much to say. As I said before, she comes to this camp. She's turning into a monster. She meets other monsters and becomes part of this sort of government program to turn these monsters into soldiers. So what we get in issue 2 is what it's like to be in that situation, what the training is like, and how she interacts no longer with just the community as a whole, but she's got what they call a pack of sort of like her regiment, that they get to know each other a little bit better. And, that's got its own good and bad. So that's mostly what the second issue is focusing on, is them creating this kind of community. But then it doesn't necessarily work out. As you mentioned, there's a sort of a major who runs Project Behemoth, who he wants to have control over every aspect of it, and is very much treating everybody, as I said, sort of like an animal. But that doesn't always go over well with the kids themselves, and so we get some conflict there.
Sounds like
I think it turns.
Go ahead.
And I hope it comes out in kind of like in unexpected ways. I think issue 2, we get some surprises pretty quickly.
Sounds like the general's trying to create his own Sinister Six, if you will.
I hadn't thought of that, but absolutely, yeah. You
told me Spider-Man. I had to throw it in there, so I was waiting.
I'm glad you gave it this long before throwing that in. Yeah, another thing that somebody when working on it, somebody was like, "Oh my gosh, it's like a dark version of the X-Men." Like if Professor X didn't love the mutants and like wanted to torture them, like that's in some ways more like it is like that he's much more controlling, wants them for his own.
Wasn't what's his name? Stryker? Is it Stryker? I think from X-Men, he does something like that, right? Doesn't where he tortures them.
Yeah, I have to. There's nothing totally new under the sun.
No. And I wasn't saying. I was just thinking. I was like, I think there is something in X-Men, but I didn't read a lot of X-Men. I got that from the movie. So don't come at me with pitchforks, guys. Don't come at me.
Yeah. Listen, there's a lot of comics out there. You can't read all of them.
Yeah.
But no, you're absolutely right. Like in some ways, a closer thing, just going along that way, is like there's the Freedom Force, and again, this might be like an old reference, but there was like the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants became when they fell under the aegis of the United States government, became known as Freedom Force. And yes, it's I hadn't thought of that, but absolutely, that's exactly what it was. Something much more like Stryker controlling them.
Dude, I love it. I love just how dark and sinister it's getting in issue number 2. I can't wait to check it out. It blows my mind. I'm going to my local comic book shop tomorrow. I'm gonna pick up issue number 1.
I hope you do.
Yeah. I cannot wait. I appreciate the PDF, but physicals, nothing against PDFs. There's nothing like getting the new comic book smell when you open it up.
I'll tell you, man. I've been looking at this book for years and stuff like that, but then when I got my comps just a couple days ago, looking and like seeing the physical thing, like it was a real amazing experience. Like I've been published before, I've seen other things, but something that I've created myself with collaborators. And actually, you'd mentioned a couple times how much you liked the lettering in issue 1. And I wanted to shout out Jesse Post, who is our letterer, who's a fantastic letterer. And he really just made, because so much of, and as it goes on, as our main characters' sort of perceptions change, you see that reflected in the lettering in the same way that there is in the letters, that she sends to her mother.
So that was your letterer's idea?
I think it was something I had suggested, something along those lines.
I really liked it, though.
Executed it. Yeah. But the idea certainly was to make the narration, make all of those things part of that experience.
God, it was dark and twisted too. Yeah. You guys are gonna love issue 1. Issue 1 is just chef kiss.
Oh well, thank you. And I guarantee 2, 3, and 4 will be just as good, or just as good. Especially if you like it dark and twisted.
Let's go. So, Chris, this brings us to the end of our interview. Before we go, though, I always like asking one question in particular, because as much as this is a nice show to kind of break down who you are, break down Behemoth and what's next, it also serves as a nice tool for anyone watching that might be new. So with someone who's like dipped their hand in so many different mediums and has started so many different projects, what advice would you give someone who just is having trouble just getting started, just getting that creative process going?
It's funny. It can be very easy to be cynical about such things, but you just shouldn't. And the only advice there is to trust yourself and to keep at it. Like you had said before about like my having it down to a science. I've been working for a couple weeks on this short screenplay idea that I have. And I'm getting nowhere with it. Sometimes there are times that, a thing is wrong. It's not that it's wrong. It's that the process of writing involves thinking, involves feeling, involves kind of figuring out what it is exactly you want to say. And I have an idea, but I haven't quite figured out a little bit more of the depth to it. And so the advice that I have is that you have to believe in yourself, and that's like I said, you can be cynical about that, or it sounds corny, but the fact is you are your only audience that matters. Of course, if you want to make a living at it, the other things become considerations.
Yeah.
But the only way you're going to make a living at it or do it well is if you are kind of true to yourself and are writing something that interests you, that you believe in. And that can be scary. And sometimes you'll write things that you'll either learn things that you don't like about yourself, or something that you don't think is good after the fact. but that's still part of the process. And I believe that so strongly, because I've been writing different kinds of things for a long time, and I can be kind of slow, and sometimes I don't do things because, you know, life gets in the way.
Mm-hmm.
But I always come back to it, and I don't give up. And I think, you know, nothing ever turns out well on the first draft, and it's by sticking with it that you get something that you can be proud of, and that can sort of stir your own soul. And I don't want to sound overly spiritual about it, but I believe these things so much, that, like, artistic expression, whatever your medium, whether it's writing, painting, anything else, I think it's such like such an amazing human impulse that is so easily squashed by a difficult world. I just think it's wonderful. But in the end, the only audience that you should worry about, the only critic you should have, should be yourself. Like, you should write a thing that you are proud of, that you think is true, that you think is right, that you think is good. And just doing it over and over and trying and hitting your head against the wall, as unglamorous as that sounds, is the only way, because it's not easy. It can seem easy, but it isn't, and it shouldn't be.
Yeah.
I don't know, it'd be great if it was, but it
Everyone
gets
would
easier,
do it then, right?
Exactly, but it gets easier as you do it. Like, the hard, like, as you put it, the hard part is getting started, and the hard part is kind of starting to believe in yourself and trusting that you have something to say.
I appreciate that. No, I love that. I love someone who can, like, really cut it straight without sugarcoating it. I think that's a big part of this, right? Is letting people know what to truly expect. And I think that was a really awesome piece of advice. That was phenomenal. Thank you so much, Chris. Everyone who's watching, Behemoth issue #1 is going to be in stores tomorrow. You can pre-order it as well. The link is right there in the stream. I'm going to post it one more time. Chris, thank you so much for coming on, giving us
Cody, it was such a pleasure.
Look.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you for breaking down pages 5 through 6 or 1 through 6 with us. First time it's going to be printed tomorrow. So this is, you know, kind of a new look out there in the visual world, I would say, right?
Yeah, it's a, like I said, a new kind of artwork that James hasn't done before, and I think it's the best looking book on the stands. Yeah, you know, it's a very different kind of art style. I don't think you're going to regret it. Whatever you might think of the story, the art at least is beautiful.
Yeah, let's go, guys. Put it on your shelf. You heard it here first. I hope you all have an awesome Tuesday night, but most importantly, keep it geekly. Man, I'm getting those endings down way good too.
I said you are.